Welcome to the Master Your Millions podcast, the show all about your financial potential and leaving a legacy for future generations. Here are your hosts, Jason and Scott Henderson.
Yes, Scott, I'm excited today to welcome Algot Sorensen. He's a seasoned sales expert, a mentor whose journey spans over 3 decades. Raised by his loving grandmother, he learned the values of resilience and hard work early on. As a proud father of two, Algot brings warmth and depth to everything he does. Notably, he also showcased his athletic prowess by playing offensive line for the University of Utah, a testament to his discipline and team spirit. With a unique blend of professional acumen and personal dedication, Algot continues to inspire and uplift those around him. Thanks for being on the show, Al.
I felt like you just read me my eulogy or something.
Well, I wanted to edify
And
you as much as I could.
I don't want to overplay the football thing either. Like I was there. I was a great blocking dummy, but but it was an awesome experience to do that in college. I would highly recommend it if it's an option for somebody. But I did not get drafted. I was big, but I was gravity challenged, so I couldn't jump high or run fast. But I am big, so I got that going for me.
Yeah, you are. I mean, I remember the very first time I met you, and it's been, uh, golly, almost 40
33 years.
years. Yeah,
Yeah.
40, 47, 48 years. It's been a long time, but it was just immediately you're very large shouldered, 6'7", big guy, but just as a heart of gold. And I could tell right away that you would be someone that I would want to be around a lot and could learn a lot from. And I have been very, very impressed as time has gone by, some of the things that you've overcome, some of the things that you've done in life. And so I want to talk a little bit about that since our podcast often is talking about how to build wealth, enjoy wealth, and pass on wealth. And that's not just money, dollars and cents. It's experience and how do you overcome things. So one of the first things, and I hope this isn't too sensitive, but I believe you were still in school and you got married for the first time, correct?
Yeah, I was 24, almost 25, a few days away from being 25, and my wife and I were both students in college at the time. And yeah, did not know much of anything. But yeah, but we got married because that's what you're supposed to do. So
And she's a phenomenal athlete herself, correct?
she was much better than me. Yeah, like in every way, she was a better athlete than me. So she ran distance, track, and cross country, and University of Utah, where we went, was a member of the Western Athletic Conference at that stage. And she was all whack as a distance runner in the U. She'd run a 5K in the 17-minute range, which I can drive it in that amount of time, but me running it in that amount of time is not going to happen. And she just had a motor. She had such good, like VO2 max was amazing, and so she was way better than me. She was a scholarship athlete where I was a walk-on. I had the advantage of being large, and that works for football, but she had the skill set to get her a scholarship to go.
And she was good enough to actually make a serious run at the Olympics, correct?
She had wanted to, that was her goal. We had some life-changing things that happened, but trying to remember what year it was. She ran the St. George Marathon. She wanted to be a marathon runner for the Olympics. That was her dream. And she just had that run that would do it. So she at the 20-mile mark, she was at 2 hours in St. George trying to qualify to get a time. And that's fast. 20 miles in 2 hours. That's way faster than what I'll do. But she hit the wall. But it turned out we found out she had a brain tumor at the time, and we didn't know that. So at 20 miles, she was like, "Oh wow, something's not right." And just like, lots of people hit the wall, and it's all been talked about. That's where she hit it first time and couldn't really get through it, which is okay. But it turns out later on she had a brain tumor growing right in the middle of her head that we ended up dealing with later on. Yeah. So yeah, she was very good, much beyond my skill set.
Which it was the tumor then that eventually took her life, correct?
It was, yeah. It started out really big and about the size of a grapefruit. And then eventually we did surgery, debulking, I think is what they call it. It was originally an astrocytoma, and it sat right between the halves of the brain. And um, they took about as much as they could. The doctor, a gentleman named Mark Reichman, who I have nothing but respect for, in our interview and talking, he came to talk to me after the surgery and goes, I know she was a runner and I know she had these things. I did not want to take away from her ability to walk. And they could test her while during the surgery. And he's like, her left side's is going to show some deficits, going to have some definite weakness. And if I took the whole thing, she wouldn't be able to walk. And I thought it was important that she could do what she loved. So, but walking it was a journey, right? Getting that back for somebody who was so fluid and so fast that walking to the edge of the bedroom to get to the doorway and back to bed was something. And then how do we get to the stairs down the hall and then back to the bed? Then how do we get outside the front door? So there are all these little mini marks. How do we get out to the driveway and come back? And then how do we get to the corner on our street and come back? And then how do we get down, you know, 5 houses and come? And so it was just this building. But he really helped us walk through that. We did not have children at that time. And she'd said, we went to visit a doctor after and said, hey, we would like to have kids. What are your thoughts? And he's like, well, yeah, I would wait a year till we ended up doing radiation therapy. And he said, I'd recommend waiting a year, but honestly, you'll be dead in 4 years. And do you want to do that to a kid? And that was like a, dagger to the heart sort of thing. So we had a huge party at 4 years. Like we made it, we beat the odds. We're all excited. And then at 4.5 years, we found the second one, and it came back as a glioblastoma, and it spread everywhere. And so we did another surgery, and oral chemotherapy worked for a time. And then around this time in 2005, she just said, I can't open my hand very well. I can't expand my fingers. I can close it, but I can't open it. I was like, no, that's not right. So we went in for another checkup, and they said it's come back. The oral chemotherapy had been working and helping. I said, well, it's come back and it's really spreading. And so ultimately, the hand not being able to open or close was a cause of wires disconnecting, is probably the best way to describe it, where the tumor would grow and no longer those synapse connections weren't able to be made. And so it started shutting down the left-hand side of her body, where at first it was her hand. And within 6 weeks, it went from I can't open my fingers to my arms turning in, to my foot's turning in, to I'm falling down, to I need a wheelchair. And then it was over. And so it was really right beginning of February in 2005. And then March 13th, 2005, she passed away.
Wow. I can't even imagine what it would be like to go through that. I mean, we've had other people on the podcast that have had, setbacks and things like that, but this has got to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest setback in someone's life. What kind of things helped you to recover and move on?
Uh, Setback. I don't know if I would use the term setback. I mean, I guess it is, but it just was, if that makes sense. It was just it cancer just was. And what I really came to figure out is that it no longer cancer makes it so you can't be on the sidelines anymore. You don't have the ability to hang out in the middle. You have to make a choice. And I'm going to choose to live, be better, improve, or I'm going to choose to curl up in a ball and sit in the corner. And everyone has their own. And I'm not saying anyone has a right way or wrong way. I know the way I did it, and I'm happy to share that. But I think, gosh, honestly, I look at it like it was a tale of two cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. In the regard of the worst of times, here's my best friend. Here's the person I enjoy hanging out with the most. Um, and slowly what they had become, like what they felt their identity was connected to as this phenomenal runner. And everything she did was based on that. I don't eat French fries. I don't drink soda because that will lower the amount of oxygen my blood can carry. If I miss running more than one day in a row, I'm in a rut. If I don't do, like everything was just designed that way. Her license plate was, I'm a runner, right? And so like her identity was that way, and slowly cancer took that. And so then what? And it took us from being like exceptional roommates and really bad at being married to how do you really care for somebody? And I think one of the defining moments for me was how do you stop and say, holy cow, this is a big load. But then at one point, you have to turn the switch and say, it's not about me. Because even though I ate French fries and drink soda and all that, and I have a low VO2 max, I was not going through what she was going through. And I think the refining moment came to create the best of times scenario, because the worst of times was watching her lose who she was. The best of times came from how we were able to refine and set away and set aside the awfulness of it and become amazingly close and understand and care for each other in ways that we had never been able to get to as a couple before. So, what does that mean? Um, I'll be candid, I was a really stupid, annoying jock, right? I did lots and lots of dumb things that I would never do again in a million years. And I'll share with you how that's changed, right? And I mean, just I think you should change your hair. I don't know about your shirt. You should do that. All the dumb things that a guy's like, oh, I'm the athlete guy, and none of those were correct. But it just in my mind, that's what I did. And I look back at it and I thought, man, I would never want Maria or my wife now, Jody, to feel that way from me again. And so what it did is, uh, I got a call at work from my wife's little sister, and she was phenomenal. And she was amazingly helpful through this trial. We fought it for 5.5 years before she passed away. We found it in October, the very end of October in 1999, and she passed away in March 13th of '05. So we had some time to figure it out. But I'm driving from where I worked in the middle of Salt Lake over to Altiview Hospital, and it's 15 minutes or something, and everything went through my mind. What about the phone call I got was it's absolutely huge, and they gave us 3 weeks. Is the phone call I got, and I was like, oh my goodness, that is a lot. And I'm like, how do you absorb that, live with that? How do you? I mean, it just, gosh, there's no way to describe what it's like and what it feels like. And so I'm just like, okay. And a little light switch went off in my head that said, Al, it's not about you. And it's just like, at this point, you could be a schmuck and you could just walk away. Or the real thing here is to step up and say, what can I do for you? And I will say, you said something when we were talking about this, like passing on wealth. The wealth I want to pass on is that I want my kids to understand that they're here to make a difference for somebody else. I did not understand at the beginning of my marriage that I was there to make a difference for Maria. I felt like I was there to make a difference for me. And that was not the right answer. And so as I went through and tried to learn and grow, I'm just looking for a picture. I'm going to get you a picture up here of the brain tumor so you can see what I saw. And then you can kind of draw some references to what on earth just happened. Um, I want to be able to give to my kids an example of what it was to be like my dad was invested in me. I was lucky enough that I grew up with my grandparents that they said, we'll give up retirement. My grandpa had retired, had actually gone on an LDS mission to build buildings in Europe, in Sweden and Norway and Denmark. And so they were like, yeah, we're in the happy stage of life. We're retired. Your parents probably know what that's like, right? Um, and so they said, okay, we'll do this. We'll take these kids back into our home. And they built us a home onto theirs because they said, it's not about me. And I guess that light switch happened as I'm driving from where I worked on the middle of State Street in Salt Lake to Altaview Hospital and said, Al, this is not about you. This is about how do you help this girl feel okay. So I'm gonna share with you this. If I are you am I allowed to share here? Is that okay?
Yes.
Um, Share with you what I saw, and then I can kind of describe it a little bit. So this is a scan of her brain from that day. And so it makes more sense. I'll get a better color. Maybe a green would stick out. This green here, that's a tumor. So the white spot you see that's sitting in the middle of that is a brain tumor. And you can see as the scan goes along that it gets a little bigger and a little bigger and a little bigger, and it's gigantic. And so I get to the hospital and I'm an emotional wreck. And I'm like, holy cow. I, Nothing had prepared me for this moment other than I had been raised by people who said, it's not about me. What can we do to make a difference for you? And I had a grandparents and I had a mom that sacrificed and gave to us what they could help us understand that it was not about them. It was about how they helped me. And I was great at taking it. I was great at saying, I'm willing to be taken care of. But at some point, I had to look at this and say, this is going to change our lives. And how do I help Maria? What do we have to do? And so, of this, absolutely large, shocking how big it is. Tumor.
Yeah. Is she in a lot of pain? I mean, that is so big right in the middle of her brain. It seemed like to me there'd be all kind of pressure and
Yeah,
everything.
they were. Uh, Oddly enough, she's been rear-ended in a car accident in February. And remember, we found the tumor in March. So she'd been rear-ended and she was having headaches. And she attributed the headaches to the rear end of the accident. So she would go to see on and off, not super regular, but on and off, would go see a doctor or a physical therapy group about, hey, help me with whiplash and that kind of stuff. So she'd go and it would get better. And then she would stop and it would come back and it would go and get better. We would go to Lake Powell and she's like, I just got headaches. And we just attributed it all to the accident, not to real life stuff. And so in October, we were on a trip in California of 99, and she started having petit mal seizures on her face, where part of her face would crimp up, and she'd be like, Al, it's happening again. And so I'd give her a hug so she didn't have to show her face. And we thought, is it like Bell's palsy? We couldn't figure it out. And then we got the answer, which is not what we were hoping for, but it is what we got. So the life changer was once that changed, everything then took time, but everything else was different. Right. And I love the idea of passing on wealth is not always money. Wealth could be a heritage, right? I loved your dad, Jason, or your grandpa, Scott, right? I loved him because he was one of the most genuine people I knew. and he and your mom really cared. And you didn't always see that. They weren't out there for the glamour. That wasn't your dad at all. I mean, he enjoyed racing you to the airport to pick up missionaries. That was fun for him, right? But he was there because he wanted to help other people. For him, that was a big deal. And that's what I got growing up with my grandparents. And I think maybe that's part of why cared so much for your dad, is because that spoke to me. I was used to that. I was used to an older generation that had been through that and had, survived and said, okay, we went to World War II because it mattered for somebody else. And I look at it like, I heard somebody said, when's the best time to plant a tree? Well, it was 20 years ago, right? But the second best time would be today. And I looked at it like my grandparents planted trees under the shade of which they would never sit. But the idea is that how do I make this so that my grandkids got and understood responsibility? How do I understand that my kids got what it was like to work? How do I get them to know these things are? And the coolest thing I saw was my grandpa. We lived on an acre, and a third of it was a garden. And I don't think it's because vegetables were cheaper to raise and grow than they were to buy at the store, but my grandpa had this serious desire to raise kids. Right. And so he would go out there with us, and he would help us in the yard, and he would be there, and he would function with it. And he was anxiously engaged in it. And I keep looking back at the idea is that what you teach happens way more from what you do than anything you'll say, right? There are tips and tricks, but when things go bad, which they do, what do you do? And that's a learned response. You see people when things go bad, they lose their mind, they freak out, they stand up and start swearing, they do all sorts of crazy stuff, right? They're lashing out because they don't exactly know. When things went bad, I had been taught a base of information and thought process that said, here's how we're going to get through it. We don't just throw up our hands and go, oh, can't get there, right? We're like, oh my gosh, when things went bad for your mom in Australia, Jason, your dad was a stud, right? Okay, this is what it is, but this is how I'm going to take care of her, right? This is how we're going to take care of Ethel. This is what we're going to do. This is the things we're going to have. And that's what he did, right? And instead of just folding up the tents and whatever, like, no, this is what we do. We're going to continue on. Everyone was like, how's that going to work out? Sister Henderson had a bad heart attack, and what's going to go on? And it wasn't like fold up the tents and hit the road, folks. It was, how are we going to make this work? So I got the diagnosis that Maria had a really, really bad brain tumor. That was a Tuesday morning. Wednesday morning, we met with another doctor, and they said, oh, I don't do stuff on the inside of the brain. I do stuff on the outside. But my partner, he does stuff on the inside of the brain. Meet him tomorrow. So we met with him on Thursday, a guy named Mark Reichman. He goes, yep, don't get it on the internet. Don't worry about it. We're going to have surgery Monday morning at 6:00. We'll see you then. And that's what we did. And then we had such a refining process, as I told you the story about how do we walk to the corner? How do we get to the 2 or 3 houses down and back? And all of a sudden it was a completely different experience of how do we do this together? How can you and I be on the same page? Because it's very easy in a relationship. I have my things, you have your things. And if they cross, that's great. But for the most part, we're separate. And that's how we lived. We were very good roommates, but not great at being married. And suddenly life said, hey, you two should collaborate. You two should work together on this. And again, cancer provides an option to choose. And you don't get to be in the middle. You have to choose I'm in, you have to choose I'm out. Right? And so, yes, cancer is a bad thing. I lost my father to colon cancer, and I get it. Right? We lose people we love and care about. But it also gives you an opportunity to say, how would I do that differently? How would I change? How would I modify? How would I leave it so that when Maria stepped away, she knew that the most important thing I did that morning was make sure she was okay. And how does that feel differently? Because I will tell you, it does feel differently. There's no comparison to, hey, yeah, see you at the end versus, hey, here's this. And so somebody said, well, what was it like? And I said, well, honestly, it was like the first 2 hours of every day was spent getting to ground level. I started out in a deep hole. I spent 2 hours to get to zero. And then hopefully I have enough energy to try and create or do or expand from there with the rest of my day. But then I know I have a check-in point. And so every morning was like, what do we have today? Do you have your medicine? Do you have these things? What appointments do you have? I had so many people help. We had ride pools to go for radiation and therapy. People were so giving and saying, of course we'll help. We would love to do that. Let's see what we can come up with. And they were great. But it changed my mindset, but it changed me as a human. It really changed the essence of who I was because I felt something different inside when it wasn't about me and when it became about other people. And I love the idea.
I really hate to do this, but we're going to cut into this episode and cut it off right here and call this part 1 of 2. Stay tuned for next week for part 2 of this incredible interview with Algot Sorensen.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Millions with Jason and Scott Henderson. Check the show notes for any links or contact information about today's guest. Make sure to follow the show so you don't miss any future episodes.